On a quiet night, a police officer is seen patrolling alone when two young men, Miller and Kevin, approach him. The officer, Zwick, actually hands Miller a map and instructs him to rob a store. Yep, the cop is running the whole operation. Miller, a skilled locksmith, breaks into the place like it's nothing. He goes straight to a hidden wall safe and cracks it open. Inside, stacks of cash. But the moment they touch the money, a hidden motion sensor goes off, alerting the police. And here's where things get dirty. Zwick is the first to show up, because of course, he planned it. He fires 2 bullets into his own car just to stage the scene. When Kevin steps out of the building, confused and unaware, Zwick shoots him point blank. Then he casually places the gun he used near Kevin's body, staging it to look like Kevin shot at him first. Miller walks out and sees it all. He loses it, shouting at Zwick, but Zwick calmly points his gun at him, warning that if Miller says a word, his wife and kid will pay the price. With no choice, Miller takes the fall for everything. Fast forward 10 years. Miller's done his time. Waiting at the prison gate is his old friend Frank, who's still got his back. Frank offers him a chance to work again, legal this time, even though Miller's license as a locksmith is long gone. Still, Frank insists, even sets up a workshop, a car, and some cash to get him started. Miller hesitates, but eventually gives in. This time, he wants to use his talents the right way. Later, he reaches out to Beth, his estranged wife, now a detective, and invites her and their daughter Lindsay to meet at an old cafe they used to visit. Beth agrees. While Lindsay orders food, Miller finally gets a moment to talk. He apologizes for everything, though he still hides the truth about Kevin's death. Beth forgives him, at least enough to let him be part of Lindsay's life, but when it comes to starting over together, she's not there yet. Later that night at the workshop, Frank sat down with Miller for a heart-to-heart. He told him straight, if anything mattered now, it was his daughter and Beth. Frank urged him not to mess it up again. This was his shot at doing right by them, and there might not be a second chance. The next morning, Frank woke Miller up like an old-school alarm clock with attitude, reminding him it was time to get to work. Miller's first job? A fancy house with a lock issue. He handled it smoothly, like he never took a break from the game. After he finished, the homeowner, Garrett, came over. He mentioned that one of his people, April, had told him about Miller's, let's say, very specific set of skills. Garrett made him an offer, not the kind you find on a job board, but the shady kind. Miller didn't even blink. He told Garrett he was done with that life. No more crimes, no more shortcuts, just honest work now. Back at the shop, surprise, April was already waiting. She finally told Miller who she really was, Kevin's sister. The weight of that hit hard. She opened up about her struggles after Kevin's death, how she ended up working as an escort just to survive. Now she needed a lot of money, fast. Miller wanted to help, but he made one thing clear. It had to be legal. No schemes, no break-ins. That didn't sit well with April. She stormed off, frustrated. Frank, who'd been listening in like a quiet guardian angel, stepped in again. He warned Miller not to fall into old traps. There were other ways to help people, ways that wouldn't drag him back down. Even if the guilt was eating him alive, he didn't have to pay for it by ruining his second chance. The next morning, just as Miller was about to head out for work, a police car pulled up in front of him. But this wasn't some routine check. Out stepped Zwick, the same crooked cop who'd roped him into that robbery a decade ago. Still as smug as ever, Zwick was there to remind Miller to keep his mouth shut. Retirement might have been around the corner for Zwick, but he hadn't loosened his grip just yet. He made it clear that he still had people watching, namely Detectives Perez and Jones. After Zwick left, the threats didn't end. Jones walked up and gave Miller a warning the old-fashioned way, with his fists. To make matters worse, Perez searched Miller's car and found a set of burglary tools, just the kind of thing that could send an ex-con straight back to prison. So they hauled him off to the station. But luck was on Miller's side, at least this time. The higher-ups quickly saw that the so-called evidence wouldn't hold up. No one could prove he'd broken into anything. Without that, they had nothing. Inside the interrogation room, the conversation got personal. His own wife, Beth, was the one questioning him. She demanded to know why he was getting tangled up in this mess again. Miller explained everything, how Zwick had pulled him over and planted the pressure on him. As for the tools, they weren't even his. Frank had left them in the car ages ago. Soon enough, their superior stepped in and cleared Miller of all charges. But before he could breathe easy, they hit him with one last warning. Working as a locksmith without a license? Still illegal. If Miller wanted to keep turning locks the honest way, he needed to get that paperwork sorted, fast. Back at the station, streamers were up and glasses were clinking. It was Zwick's retirement party. He stood before the crowd, making himself sound like a hero in his farewell speech. Once the applause faded, he pulled Beth into his office, handed her a glass of wine, and pitched an offer. Take over as the new head of the department. But, of course, there was a catch. Zwick didn't just want her in charge. He wanted her to keep tabs on Miller, like a built-in watchdog, making sure he never dared speak out against the truth. Meanwhile, Miller was busy brushing up on his old skills. Despite everything, his hands still had the magic. He was as sharp with a lock as ever. Just then, Beth called and asked him to pick up Lindsay from school while she stayed at the party. Miller, thrilled to get more time with his daughter, headed straight over. After picking her up, he took Lindsay to the park for lunch. Curious and wide-eyed, she couldn't stop asking questions about lockpicking. She even begged for a demonstration. Wanting to impress her, Miller brought her to the workshop and showed her a few tricks of the trade. To his surprise, and hers, she nailed it on her very first try. Later that evening, he dropped Lindsay off at the same party Beth was attending, Zwick's big send-off. There, Beth told him she had officially taken over Zwick's position as department head, working alongside Perez and Jones. Miller kept his cool, forcing a smile, even though the news burned him inside. Then Zwick showed up, smug as ever, tossing another veiled threat Miller's way. Miller didn't say a word. He shut the car door and drove off. Back at the shop, April was waiting once again. She told Miller more about her nightmare working under Garrett, a powerful real estate mogul. He treated her like property, passing her around to his shady business associates. April showed him the bruises left by one of Garrett's violent clients. Desperate for freedom, she needed money, fast, and this time, Miller couldn't say no. The next day, April pointed out Garrett's lavish mansion. Tomorrow night, there'd be a high-profile casino party at the house. While everyone was distracted, Miller would have his shot to sneak into Garrett's office unnoticed. Back at the station, Beth, now officially in charge, was already finding cracks in the system. She discovered a stash of unresolved escort case files and realized Zwick had been sweeping serious misconduct under the rug. That night, Garrett's party kicked off as planned. The guest list was elite: business tycoons, city officials, even a few off-duty cops. Disguised behind a mask, Miller slipped in through the back door of Garrett's estate. Inside, April spotted him sneaking around and quickly created a scene by crashing into a server, sending drinks flying. That gave Miller just enough time to slip through the crowd and head toward Garrett's office. But he wasn't alone. Zwick was also at the party and, recognizing Miller, began trailing him in silence. Once inside the office, Miller got lucky. A bag stuffed with cash was sitting right there on the table. No need to crack the safe, but just as he reached for it, Zwick barged in. Acting fast, Miller disarmed him and pointed the gun straight at his chest. For a second, it looked like he might pull the trigger. But Miller knew better. The place was swarming with cops and VIPs. Killing Zwick here would be suicide. Instead, he grabbed one bag of money and bolted. His exit wasn't clean. A few guards spotted him, forcing him to run right through the heart of the party. Thinking fast, he grabbed April and used her as a human shield. When he got near the door, he gave her a push and vaulted over a wall into the night. The heist was done. He'd made it out. Barely. Back inside, Garrett was fuming. Zwick, the man who was supposed to keep things secure, had let someone waltz out with a bag of his money. Zwick, humiliated and angry, promised to find the thief and recover the stolen cash. At the workshop, Miller hid the money inside Frank's old safe and tried to reach April. No answer. Growing concerned, he rushed to her place, only to find it ransacked. April was gone. No sign of a struggle. No clue where she went. It was like she vanished. Elsewhere, at Beth's house, she received an unexpected visitor, Tanya, one of April's co-workers. Tanya came with a flash drive full of dirt on Garrett. It exposed everything: his crimes, his ties to Zwick, and the dirty work of Perez and Jones. Photos, videos, enough evidence to blow everything wide open. Later that night, when Miller got home, Frank exploded after discovering the stolen money in his safe. Miller tried to explain. He did it for April. He couldn't sit back while she suffered. Frank, though furious, told him to take the evidence to Beth, but Miller refused. If Beth got involved, Zwick wouldn't hesitate to send Perez or Jones after her. Frank said no more. He let Miller carry the weight on his own. While Miller tried to rearrange the cash, Beth showed up. He quickly hid the money. She came looking for answers about April, about the past. She even asked why Miller was sent to prison all those years ago. But Miller stayed silent. He took the blame and kept April out of it. Back at the office, Beth compiled everything Tanya had brought. She handed it all to her superiors, hoping it would finally bring justice. But something was missing. A witness. Beth knew that Tanya's testimony alone wouldn't hold up. As an escort, the court might question her credibility. She needed a second witness, someone solid. That same night, Miller returned to Garrett's mansion, slipping past the guards without a sound. He came with a deal, release April, and he'd return every cent he stole. But Garrett played dumb, claimed he didn't know where April was. Miller wasn't buying it. His frustration boiled over, and when Garrett lunged at him, Miller fought back, hard. He pinned Garrett down and forced his head into water, demanding answers. Eventually, gasping for air, Garrett caved. April wasn't missing. Zwick had her. That was all Miller needed to hear. He raced off to save her, but from a distance, something felt off. April was with Zwick watching Miller's departure. April and Zwick were working together, setting a trap for Miller. Her cries for help were nothing but bait, a setup to push Miller into stealing the money. April wanted payback for Kevin's death, and she planned to pin the entire crime on Miller. Later, Zwick slipped into Garrett's home, wearing gloves and a cold expression. He murdered Garrett on the spot, then made it look like Miller had done it. Back at the workshop, Miller told Frank the truth. Garrett didn't take April. Zwick did, but Frank wasn't impressed. He told Miller to stop digging and give the stolen money to Beth. Let her deal with it legally. Miller's rogue actions were only making things worse, and one wrong move could send him back to prison, this time for good. Soon after, Beth showed up at the workshop with Lindsay. She was done pretending. She'd figured out the truth behind Miller's lies. This time, Miller came clean. The night Kevin died, he hadn't been armed. Zwick shot him on purpose and planted a gun next to his body. Miller stayed silent because Zwick had threatened Beth and Lindsay's lives. He couldn't take that risk. Beth listened, stunned, but resolute. She wasn't going to let him face this alone. As his wife, she'd stand by him. She asked for the stolen money, vowing to take it to the authorities and push for justice through the courts. Miller agreed to stay behind with Frank and protect Lindsay. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Perez and Jones broke into Zwick's old office. Inside a drawer, they found the flash drive Beth had compiled. Curious, they plugged it in, and panic hit them like a truck. Photos, videos, audio. The whole ugly truth was on there, and if that evidence reached court with credible witnesses to back it up, they wouldn't just lose their jobs, they'd lose their lives. Meanwhile, Zwick and April had checked into a hotel, hiding out while chaos unfolded. But their quiet moment didn't last. Zwick got a call from Jones. Bad news. Their superior had seen the flash drive evidence that Beth had submitted. Even though Jones had recovered the drive, the damage was done. The truth was already out. Zwick exploded in anger. The original plan had crumbled, and now he wanted to wipe the slate clean the hard way. Eliminate Beth, Miller, and anyone else who stood in their way, grab the money, and vanish from the city. That wasn't what April had signed up for. They had agreed to frame Miller and get rid of Garrett. Nothing more. Now Zwick was talking about killing an entire family. Feeling the weight of her betrayal, April turned on Miller, demanding he trade the money directly with her before Zwick got his hands on it. But she was quickly realizing this had gone too far. An innocent child was in danger, and April began to feel real remorse. Back at the workshop, Miller got a frantic call from April. She begged him to run, but it was too late. Perez showed up and shot Miller in the leg without hesitation. Frank, watching from a distance, returned fire and managed to take out Jones, but Perez's bullet struck Frank in the chest. He died instantly. Now it was just Miller and Lindsay. Perez grabbed the girl, using her as a human shield, demanding the money, but it was gone. Beth had already taken it. Miller, bleeding and desperate, tried to reason with Perez, slowly lowering his weapon. He had nothing left but words. Elsewhere, Beth was driving when a breaking news alert hit the radio. Shots fired at the workshop. She turned the car around in a panic, racing back, but she arrived too late. Lindsay was gone, taken by Perez. Soon after, Zwick called. He didn't waste time. He wanted the money in exchange for Lindsay's life. This time, Miller had no choice but to trust Beth. She would head for the hotel to rescue Lindsay while he'd meet Zwick at the drop point with the money. It was risky, but it was all they had. At the hotel, Perez led Lindsay into April's room and handcuffed her. Then he stepped outside to assess the area and called out for April. Silence. April was gone, and now Perez was alone with a hostage, a missing partner, and the walls closing in fast. Meanwhile, at the meetup spot, Zwick greeted Miller at gunpoint, demanding to see the money. Miller tried to stall, asking him to release Lindsay first, but Zwick wasn't playing games. He ordered Miller to ditch his pistol again. Back at the hotel, Perez stepped out of the room to check on the situation, calling for April, but she was already gone. Inside the room, Lindsay worked on unlocking the handcuffs using the techniques her father had taught her. After some effort, she succeeded and quietly slipped out, heading for the door. Once she had the chance, she sprinted down the stairs. At the same time, Beth, who had successfully infiltrated the building, waited below. With quick reflexes, she shot Perez dead. Without wasting a moment, Beth took Lindsay to the car and locked her inside, telling her not to let anyone in. Back at the meeting point, Miller had no choice but to surrender, raising his hands. Zwick, holding the stolen money, was ready to pull the trigger and end Miller's life. Suddenly, April appeared, firing the gun Miller had thrown away earlier, hitting Zwick, but April still held a grudge and pointed her weapon at Miller, blaming him for everything. She said if he hadn't involved Kevin in the robbery, Kevin would still be alive and her life wouldn't be ruined. At that moment, Beth arrived, trying to convince April to stop. But April was determined to kill him. Miller didn't argue. He admitted everything with deep regret. Closing his eyes, he prepared for the bullet. However, Miller's honesty eventually moved April. Beth quickly embraced her, promising to care for April. Soon after, the police arrived to take control. April was taken into custody and brought to the station to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Miller was praised for exposing the corrupt police officers. The next day at the police department, Beth was promoted to lieutenant for her courage. That's the end of this recap. If you enjoyed this movie, consider subscribing for more interesting stories. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.